So on the surface, it looked like everything was successful, but below that false facade of success was still just this broken home and broken person, and ended up in a full-blown affair. We sold our home, filed for divorce, signed 2 separate 12-month leases on 2 separate apartments, so we're pretty committed. I remember like packing our house. This is pretty, like, sounds pretty twisted probably. We're packing our house. Our family sits together. We're crying together, holding each other, supporting each other. And they're leaning on me as a dad and a husband, and I still put stuff in that U-Haul and separate our family. And because I thought the problem was, I thought the problem were different things. I thought she didn't understand, and I'm too destructive, and this can never, be sorted out. That's a lie that most divorced people think, right? This could be better for the kids. They're not going to have to get 2 Christmases, and I got to deal with the fighting anymore. They got to be exposed to all these things. It's going to be better for them. We all know that's a lie. The statistics show that's a lie. Unless there's violence in the home, it's usually not better. It's better to fight for your family and work it out. My wife and I had 2 very different responses. My wife went to a church. She switched churches to a small church where she felt she could be connected. And that's when she started praying for me. That's when she went, and I don't mean on Sundays. She went like almost every day of the week praying, that prayer, God, let me see Chad the way you see Chad. Meanwhile, I set up this apartment, and within 2 or 3 days, I had my bachelor pad. Like, it's all decorated, stuff on the wall. It's actually makes me very embarrassed to say this and super disgusted to say this about myself. I didn't even put my family pictures out in the living room because I didn't want girls to come in there and see that. Like, I had a shelf in my closet that I put all my family pictures on because I wanted to look like a single guy. That's the state of selfishness that I was in. And I signed up for a fight on Strikeforce. I focused on training for this fight. And I fought a kid named Roberto De Leon. I was undefeated. He was like a stud coming up. Like, if you like fights like this, like my Rocky Balboa, like every round I kicked him in the face, knocked his mouthpiece out, knocked him down. He punched me in the head, knocked me down, just back and forth. And so for the first time in my professional career, I go to decision. First judge calls for Humberto, and I'm like, second judge calls for me. The third judge calls for me. My hand's raised, and all the weight's off because I just won this fight. I've been training for 3 months. Everything gets quiet. And I remember looking around thinking, like, of all these people here. And meanwhile, I hadn't been fighting for my family. And everybody's congratulating me on my win. And I just wanted to go home. So I got in the car, went home by myself, and I'm laying in bed, and my mind starts spinning. And I'm thinking, like, of all the damage I caused, like my father, people in the military, right? I was like just mad, and my wife for never understanding me. Like, everyone's an idiot. That was my mentality. But in that moment, I'm like, you know what the common denominator is? It's me. Like, I'm the problem. This thought came over me that maybe my family would be sad without me, but they would be better off, right? Maybe my family would be sad without me, but they'd be better off. And I think probably everybody listening to your show probably knows that the same hopeless thought finds a home in the hearts of, but that same hopeless thought finds a home in the hearts of people every single day. That maybe my family and my loved ones will be sad without me, but they'll be better off. But I do believe a lot of people, and I say this not just in my situation, I'm just talking to survivors. I believe a lot of people believe that they are the problem, and if they remove themselves from the situation, it's going to be better for those around them. This Marine Pete that I know, stood in the back of his pickup truck, surrounded by police, and the last thing he said was, "Tell my wife I love her, and I'm doing this for her." And he blew his brains out. And Heather, his wife, and she said something that really stuck out to me. She said, Pete thought he was taking away the pain, but all he did was transfer it to everyone who loved him. Because in that moment, that's what I believed. I believed that I was going to take away everyone else's problems by taking my life. And I thought that was a solution for my family. That's the best thing I could do. Like, I had my time. I'm never going to be able to do something as important as I did again. And I don't have a purpose anymore. That I'm ruining the people's lives that I love most. And so I made the decision. And I had a Glock 22 pistol. And I was sitting on the floor of my closet. And I pulled those pictures of my family off that shelf. And I'd put them on a circle on the floor around me. And I would just stare at them for a while. And I tried to build up the courage to pull the trigger. But I do believe this was divine, because every time I put the gun to my head, I would have a vision of who was going to find me, because someone's going to hear it, or you're not going to show up somewhere, or you're going to start smelling, right? Eventually someone's going to find you. And the only other person that had a key to my apartment at that time was my oldest son, Hunter. He was 13 at that time. And the thought of my son being part of finding me that way was enough to pump the brakes. But I was in such a dark place that like that day or the next day, after a period of almost 2 weeks, I was just battling back and forth trying to make the decision. And there was one morning I was in that closet and I heard a knock on my door, and I wasn't going to answer it. I was just going to ignore it. I didn't know who it was. But when I heard Kathy's voice announce herself, I totally panicked that I hid the gun under a blanket, even though she would have never came to see. I hid it. That's probably how ashamed I was of what I was doing. I was just so mad that she interrupted me killing myself. Like, how dare her come there to my apartment that I didn't ask her to come to and interrupt that. And I ran to the door and I was just like, open the door and totally berated her. But in that moment, I think God gave her like this calmness, and she was super calm. And I was just trying to get her out of there. I was telling her to leave. And she asked me a question. How could you do everything that I've seen you do in your life? How could you do all of that, and when it comes to your family, you'll quit? Man, to me, there's no more soul-cutting word than to be called a quitter. And she was absolutely right. I quit in all those things, including my will to live. And I'm a pretty radical decision maker. And in that moment, I made a decision to get back in the fight. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. And I knew I couldn't do it with the people I'd surrounded myself by. And so I asked Kathy, is there someone at this church you're going to, some man that could hold me accountable to trying to put my life back together? I didn't care about God. I didn't care about her church. And she called the church, and there was an elder on call named Steve Toth. I met Steve at a Starbucks coffee shop, and while he wasn't a retired SEAL or anything like that, what Steve had was the gift. He's got ADD. The reason that was such a gift for me is because I had already decided in my mind, my new goal was to get my family back. So I was like, what do I have to do to manipulate this situation, sweep everything under the rug, and get a clean slate? So I wrote a 5-paragraph op order of how I was going to fix my life, and it was super good. It was very impressive. And I went to this meeting with Steve prepared to do that. But because he's freaking got ADD, he wouldn't even look at it. Like, I put it on the table, I slid it over to him, and I'm like, hey, check this out. Show it to my wife so I can get her back. She knows I'm serious now. She's going to forgive me. Everything's going to be good. He puts his hand on that paper without even looking at it, slides it back over to me and tells me I'm going to fail. And I remember being like, who is this jerk? Like, he didn't even look at it. And he tapped on that paper, and he said something that was probably the most important thing I ever heard in my life. He said, if your plan doesn't have anything to do with your relationship with God, I'm not going to waste your time, and I'm not going to let you waste mine. The person that Steve had mentored right before me, I didn't know this till later. The person he had mentored right before me, he had been passive with, and the guy took his life. And he knows he has to be direct with me and bold with me. So this plan doesn't have anything to do with your relationship with God. You're going to fail. You're going to fall on your face. You end up right back where you are. Right? Everything I tried didn't work. Why not try something different? So this guy's telling me, that I have to have faith. I knew that was the one thing I didn't have. There was a chink in my 4 pillars of resiliency. That was the chink in the armor, was I didn't have that spiritual pillar. And I'm like, thinking like, what do I have to lose? I tried everything else. What do I have to lose? Why not try? And so I made a decision at that moment to trust this guy, Steve, and I surrendered my life to Jesus.